Hello and welcome to this on-demand WatchDox webinar entitled The Cure for the Box Syndrome. I'm Ryan Kalember. I run product strategy and marketing here at WatchDox, and I'm going to give you a bit of flavor today about how the uptake of browser-based file sharing services has impacted the enterprise and what that does to both information security departments as well as broader IT when it comes to finding a solution to maintain security and maintain compliance in the face of this very important facet of what is often called the new IT. So with that, I'll dive right in. Now, it's a very, very interesting decision point when a senior executive shows up with a new tablet device, very likely to be something like an iPad. He might not have a tremendously detailed understanding of how to use it, and it presents some interesting challenges for those who are accustomed to using things like PCs. For one, the device doesn't have the traditional sort of file system, and a senior executive like the gentleman pictured here is going to want to have access to his files on all of his devices, especially his shiny new tablet. So the easiest way to do that is, of course, to download a consumer file sharing product, something like Dropbox here, and put all of those files in the cloud. Now, as an IT security or IT person, that presents you with an interesting conundrum. Do you say, yes, Mr. CEO, please go ahead and use a consumer file sharing service to put all of our enterprise's most sensitive information on the cloud, where it's likely to be deduplicated on the back end and stored on Amazon S3 with a thin layer of file sharing on top of it? Or do you say no, which is something that can often be considered a bit of a career-limiting move to say no to a CEO? So really, there's no obviously good answer here, but this is a problem that we have to face up to. And here are some rather staggering numbers from a couple of different sources that really underscore the scope of the box syndrome as it's affecting today's enterprises. Now, our friends over at Palo Alto Networks, who make next-generation firewalls, did a 6-month-long survey of network usage at 1,600 different large enterprises around the world. And they found that the average organization has 13 browser-based file sync applications in use over that 6-month period. Now, that doesn't even include peer-to-peer file sharing applications. It simply is limited to browser-based file sharing applications, and there are so many of them that 13 show up on the average network. In fact, Palo Alto Networks detected a total of 65 different browser-based file sharing applications in total. These applications are pretty difficult to block in traditional ways if you are interested in blocking them, because they all operate over port 80 and port 443 and are essentially web applications. Now, the scope of that usage is best encapsulated in the statistics of the most popular file sharing service that is browser-based, which is, of course, Dropbox. 76% of those organizations that were surveyed by Palo Alto, and this is actual usage data as opposed to a questionnaire or something, sent traffic to Dropbox, and over the 6-month duration of the survey, they sent on average 2 gigabytes per month to Dropbox, a total of about 14 gigabytes per enterprise, which is a staggering amount of corporate data to be hosted on a cloud service that is designed for consumers and is really optimized for things like photos and videos rather than security. Now, on the bottom of the slide, you see some equally impressive numbers from a recent Harris poll. 81% of employees admitted to using their personal devices at work. And that's not really a malicious thing. That's not a bad thing, in fact. If you're doing more work, that's generally something you're probably going to consider a good thing. You're going to be more productive if you use the type of device you want to use. And there's a lot of goodness to be had from trends like bring your own device. That said, at the bottom of that same tile, you see part of the problem with this. 46% of those surveyed also let other people use that same device that they use to access their work information. Now, that is a very large security risk, as is the number on the lower right, which is that 2/3 of those surveyed who use their own device for work, so 2/3 of that 81%, said that their organization didn't have any kind of policy describing how bring your own device was supposed to be practiced, what controls you might take, how you would use corporate information, what type of corporate information you would be allowed to access from an unmanaged, presumably possibly insecure device. This means that a lot of things change for both IT and IT security. And there are a couple of inexorable trends that are leading to the kind of forced adoption of a mindset that's going to have to take account of this. The first is that work has most definitively gone mobile, and it's gone multi-device. So whether that's a smartphone or a tablet, people are going to be using their own devices to access sensitive corporate data. That's simply going to be the case for, as we've seen, more than 4 in 5 employees, and they're going to demand universal document access. They have a document on their PC and they want to go work on it on their iPad. They're simply going to deem that a fundamental requirement of doing business, rather than something that they have to ask the IT security department for permission to do. That means, from the perspective of IT and IT security, you're going to have your sensitive data on devices that are not managed by you. So you can't install traditional tools to control that information. The second bit is that work has gone fundamentally collaborative, and the collaboration is increasing exponentially. More volume of data is shared every day, and that data is often going to third parties. That means that the perimeter around enterprises that we've relied on for so long to establish some basic tenets of security, what can go in, what can go out, where can sensitive data go, as well as compliance, has started to dissolve. Now, there are those who would argue that the enterprise perimeter never really existed to begin with, and now that pretty much every device is connected to the internet, there is no perimeter. And they have a point, but certainly mobile and collaboration trends have completely dissolved any notion that there is an enterprise information perimeter that you can defend in traditional ways. And those traditional ways are encapsulated in some of the tools that either try and create and defend a perimeter, or try and detect bad guys and other anomalous activity in attempting to keep corporate data secure. As we see it at WatchDox, there's not going to be a proper model for this unless it is data-centric. And what I mean by that is best illustrated by the types of security controls that are at your disposal inside the perimeter versus outside the perimeter. Now, inside the perimeter, you have a variety of different technologies that can create a boundary, something like a firewall, an intrusion prevention device, unified threat management devices, data loss prevention, and on and on and on. In addition, you have a bunch of different technologies like SIEM, vulnerability management, identity and access management, database activity monitoring that can all try and catch bad or anomalous activity. Outside the perimeter, and thus includes both mobile devices and devices owned by and controlled by third parties, you have none of those options. You can't install antivirus software on an iPad. And that's both because iOS is not going to allow applications running in the background like Norton. Now, if it did, then Symantec would certainly have come out with Norton for iPad by now. But also because that's a personal device, and it's very unlikely that the owner of that device will submit to complete IT control over what is essentially, according to the employee, a personal device. Now, it's not really necessarily in IT's interest either to be managing dozens and dozens and possibly hundreds or even thousands of new smartphones and tablets that were never under enterprise control before. And that's why the only viable solution to dealing with the new IT is to build security into the data itself. And I'll describe a little bit about how that can be done and what it results in. So the result is obviously business value, as you see from the slide here, but there are different ways that you enable that. So if you're able to build security into the data itself, then no matter where that data travels, if it's sent to a third party for collaboration purposes, if it goes to an unmanaged insecure device to support a BYOD initiative, you can still also control that information. So building the security controls into the data itself and making them part and parcel of that data, not some things that you can just layer on top, things that you fundamentally can't remove from the data, means that you can enable productivity initiatives like file sync and do so securely and in compliance with your existing policies. Although it, of course, doesn't hurt to come up with some new ones for things like BYOD, which brings us to the second point. So mobile applications are an absolute prerequisite of controlling information on smartphones and tablets, but if you build secure mobile applications that can enforce those data-centric security controls we just talked about, that enables you to be more flexible and to safely enable things like BYOD. The next bit is the dynamism of those controls. If you can change access to information or the type of things that people can do with data at any time, you can be far more agile in how you collaborate with the outside world. Now, I'll give you an example. So say you're collaborating with an outside party. Say you're being sued. Let's take a bad example. Right? For discovery purposes, there's all kinds of documents that you have to then share with a third party, which is a hostile third party, because of course they're suing you. You send those pieces of data to them. They're able to look through those documents, and they have a legal right to do so. Now, there's a couple of different things that can happen. Either they can sue you, and this becomes part of a court case, or they can reach the conclusion that there's actually no grounds to sue you, and the case goes away. Now, you can revoke access to any sort of system you might have granted them access to as part of a discovery process, but you can't necessarily pull back that data unless, of course, you've built the controls into the data itself. So even after you've sent data to a law firm or a third party who's doing discovery, it's very, very useful if you can then revoke their access, even if you've already sent it, even if it's been downloaded offline to a device that you do not control and that you do not have the ability to mandate policy on. So that's one sort of a negative example. A positive example could be so what happens when you change different mobile devices. So say one of your employees has an iPad 2 and really wants a third generation iPad, and they're going to put that second generation iPad on eBay. Now, revoking all of the data that might be on that second generation iPad is a really good idea before the employee buys a third generation iPad, and you can enable them to have the same access to that data from the new device. Of course, the same goes for if a device goes missing. The last piece is visibility, right? So tracking logs can be done if you build security into data itself. So if you build security into things like spreadsheets, and those spreadsheets either end up with outside parties or end up across different employee devices, you can track where they've been opened, what they've been used for, who edited them, who printed them, who did anything to those different documents. And that becomes a very, very powerful tool to stay in compliance while continuing to build out the new elements of IT that users are demanding, and to really serve as an enablement technology, which is rare for security, but is sort of refreshing in this context. That means that you're fundamentally controlling documents outside the box. And why this is an important point is because we're using box here in a very generic sense. Right? A box is just a container, and it's actually not too hard to build a secure container. What it's much harder to do, though, is to control the information that will go in those secure containers. You know, you can pretty easily secure data as it moves from one place to another. If data is not going anywhere, it's also pretty easy to secure that. It's called encryption data at rest. However, controlling how data is used is the only real form of security that you're going to have if your data is going to end up with third parties or on unmanaged devices where you don't have direct control. So if you can build, again, the security into the data itself, you actually have some options. And that's what we are all about at WatchDox. So what we are doing is developing the industry's only document-centric security platform that enables all the good stuff, all the access and sharing and file sync, in addition to the controls that enterprises need to stay secure and stay compliant while they start to evolve their IT operations to a post-PC world. How we do this, I'll cover pretty briefly here. However the document gets into our system, whether that's via a traditional workflow like sending an email attachment or something like Microsoft SharePoint or Salesforce.com, any of the sort of document repositories in most organizations, what we do is we take that document in, we first off wrap it with encryption, but also then build controls into that document, either by policy that's defined by who you are in an organization. So if you're in a legal department and you're sending an email attachment, you might have a certain set of controls that apply to everything that you send. If not, if you're just a document owner, you might be able to specify what controls. And those controls are things like the recipient can forward that document to somebody else. We'll just track it. The recipient cannot print the document. The recipient's not supposed to copy and paste out of the document. The recipient is not supposed to forward it to anybody outside their own email domain. And they get fairly granular, of course. And crucially, we need to enforce those across all platforms. So there's the next piece here. So that's the secure repository, which is either going to run in the cloud or, for the most security conscious organizations, on an on-premise appliance. And that will provide device optimized access. So this is sort of the carrot that goes along with the stick. The stick are the controls. The carrot is you get perfect document fidelity. You get everything that you want from a file sharing perspective, from a file access perspective, and you get it on the device you want, but it also stays controlled. And to do that, we actually have to render the document in a variety of different ways after doing things like full text indexes so that the document's contents are searchable and all kinds of other feature enablement. So you can do anything you want from the mobile device, from annotating the document to securely sharing those annotations to viewing things and also to syncing things across all of those documents and providing a viable enterprise alternative to consumer file sharing services. Now, the best part of this from an IT perspective might just be the compliance side. Because speaking as somebody who's done quite a few compliance assessments in my time, we were always kind of at arm's length from the data we wanted. So if you really look at most regulations out there that information security professionals deal with, they all have to do with making sure that an organization is taking good care of a particular kind of data. And we always tried to validate that in slightly indirect ways. So for Sarbanes-Oxley, often what some of the Section 404 controls were about monitoring the file servers that might have been involved in putting together financial results. For PCI, particularly requirement 10, you had to monitor the logs, which are almost entirely at the server level, in order to assure that bad things were not happening to cardholder information. Now that is a really, really indirect way to go about compliance because server logs are generally records of servers behaving normally and are not tremendously interesting pieces of information. And in order to figure out who did what to what piece of data, you had to infer based on who was logged onto the system at the time, who might have touched what data. Now, if you're actually building the security controls into the data itself and then you're tracking what happens to that data, you get really interesting information. You can see not only who accessed the data and from where, you can see what they did with it. Did they download it? Did they copy something out of it? Did they edit it? Did they print it? You really get a granular document-by-document record of what happened to that sensitive data, which sets up a very elegant compliance model. Now, with that, we have a fairly differentiated platform. I won't dwell on any of these points. You can, of course, read them here on the slides. But one of the big foci when we built the WatchDox platform was all about usability. Now, Dropbox is a wonderful, wonderful product that is incredibly useful for sharing things like photos and videos and other things that don't have to be secured. They also did quite a lot to solve some interesting problems on the back end with synchronization and usability, which have generally gone to enrich the overall space. So it's pushed everybody's technology forward. They've also done some incredible things with scale that we've done on our own level, now supporting in our larger deployments millions of different documents flying around and always staying under control. But most critically is the upper right-hand corner there, the security component of what we've done. So what we've done is build the platform from the ground up to be both highly usable, but more than that, incredibly secure. So enterprise level security from the very, very start. We didn't necessarily add security on after building a file sharing platform or building a file sharing browser-based product. We built security in from the ground up. And with that, we've then moved into supporting our larger enterprise clients who, of course, have their documents in lots of places already. So at the content creation level, at the SharePoint level, with their CRM systems like Salesforce, and then supporting different technologies like Active Directory for identifying who users are for policy purposes, and even integrating with really strong security technology like hardware security modules for the optimal cryptography security, or strong authentication technologies to make sure who you claim to be is exactly who you are, is something we've been focusing on in order to support the more demanding enterprise clients and what they need in order to continue to comply with their information security and compliance regimens that they're subject to, all while moving to very progressive forms of IT, like enabling BYOD, like enabling file sync, etc. So you see here a couple of case studies. So the very, very large realty trust does all of their deals through the collaboration functionality of the WatchDox platform. And they also secure documents for the top executives on iPads, as in the use case from the gray-haired gentleman on that first slide I showed. Another very, very large private equity firm is now protecting all the communications they send to all their limited partners, which are very sensitive documents that they don't want, say, leaking to Bloomberg, as well as supporting all of their senior executives in their copious use of things like iPads. This particular customer, which I can actually name, it's the Blackstone Group, spends quite a bit of time securing all kinds of different documents on tablets because they work very, very long hours, and they're often just simply making annotations to documents rather than making wholesale edits to them. And often if you're working nights and weekends, it's much easier to take an iPad with you rather than print a massive document and then have your admin try and make those changes later as annotations. Now, a very, very large financial data firm is also using our API, so it's completely under the covers of their normal application to send out sensitive reports to hundreds of different recipients and allowing over 1 million secure documents per year. Then, of course, you've got another financial services firm on the lower right there. The primary value of their company is their intellectual property. They do quite a bit of hardcore research, which, of course, is a trading advantage, which is the entire value for, basis for the value of the firm. And they send over 250,000 intellectual property assets securely every year to commodity traders. Now, another set of interesting use cases is basically data on iPads. And while this is not always file sync, it involves many different types of applications that touch on file sync. So, for instance, scripts in the entertainment industry they often leak out and are posted on websites online. Now, that leads to serious problems and serious compromise of box office receipts, particularly if it's a movie that relies on a twist. So we have a number of different customers in the entertainment industry using the WatchDox platform to sync their script files across various different platforms, whether those are smartphones or iPads, as well as PCs, and then allow actors and their agents to look at those scripts to decide whether they actually want to consider a role, make whatever notes they want, and keep that all secure so it can't leak out to a website. A manufacturing firm there controls all its product design documents that are actually, in fact, sent to iPads on factory floors in Asia. That's really more of a collaboration use case, but it is one where they don't actually control those iPads because those aren't their employees. There is no device management solution there. What they do is they secure millions of different product designs with these third-party contractors that actually end up manufacturing the products in, I believe it's Indonesia and Vietnam. And they're able to control the documents no matter where they go. And because those third-party factories can at least physically secure the iPads, they protect themselves from counterfeit versions of those same products. In transportation, a lot of different airlines have moved to protecting flight manuals that are going to be on pilots' iPads rather than the heavy cases they used to lug around where the flight manuals weighed 50+ pounds and were made of paper. That's another case where the pilot is going to want access across a couple of different secured devices, and it's very useful to make sure that that document only stays where it's supposed to stay. And on the government side, a parliamentary democracy here is using iPads and the WatchDox platform to secure the documents that are required to run the government from a financial perspective in the case of a transition of power. So this particular parliamentary democracy doesn't have a transition period like the US does between an election and the actual transfer of power. So what they do is they simply give 2 sets of iPads to both parties, and the winning party gets to keep their documents, and the losing party gets their document access revoked, even though, of course, they don't repossess the iPads. Now, just a bit about who we are. We were founded in 2007. We're based in Palo Alto, California. At this point, we've got over 500 customers using this. Over 60 employees, most of us with a security background, my own background. I came from ArcSight most recently, and this is my 5th security company. Our backing is Shlomo Kramer, who's of course one of the pioneers of the firewall while he was at Checkpoint and is now the CEO of Imperva, as well as some venture firms and the Blackstone Group, which is a private equity firm. You see a bit about our analyst recognition and some awards we've won there, and a few of our customers featured on the lower left. If you have any other questions about WatchDox, please do get in touch. We'd love to talk to you about curing your own version of the box syndrome. Thank you, and I hope you have a wonderful day.